I made a video just last week about Mozi. It was a 10-minute video and I can't cover everything in just 10 minutes. And after I recorded it, I realised there's so much more I could say about Mozi. He's a very difficult philosopher to fathom, and there's more quotes I wanted to get into. Sometimes Mozi backs up his claims for the need for frugality and thriftiness by drawing on tradition. For example, in this quote from page 141, Mozi said, "Anciently, Yao went north to instruct the 8 tribes of Di. He died on the way and was buried in the shade of Mount Cheong. Of shrouds there were 3 pieces. The coffin was of soft wood and sealed with flax linen. Weeping started only after the burial. There was no mound, only the pit was filled up. After burial, oxen and horses plodded over it. Yao, of the mythical Xia dynasty, died in a very frugal manner, and even after his death, his tomb was used once again for farming there. The oxen and horses plodded over it. They were regarded as culture heroes like Yao and Shun, were regarded as the ideal leaders. Both Mozi and Kongzi will draw on these culture heroes to say why people should be the way they want them to be. In the Warring States period Mozi lived in, China was racked by war. Hundreds and hundreds of years of war between these warring states. This certainly made him feel that talking about these states and how they shouldn't attack each other this was very important to him, such as this quote taken from page 169. "Now the lords and chiefs in the world all attack and absorb others. This is 1,000 and 10,000 times worse than killing one innocent individual. 1,000 and 10,000 times worse than jumping over another's fence and maltreating his children, or digging into another's storehouse and carrying away his gold, jade and silk. Yet they claim to be righteous." Mozi said, "This is meant to confuse us. Is this at all different from confusion in the distinction between black and white, and sweet and bitter? Suppose a man who, upon being shown a little blackness, says it is black, but upon seeing much blackness says it is white. He will have to admit that his sight is confused, and that he cannot tell the difference between black and white. Suppose a man, when served with little bitter, says it is bitter, but when served with a lot of bitter, says that it is sweet." Mozi also in practice was a master of defensive siegecraft and advocated for the defense of smaller states against larger states. Seemingly he wanted to keep an equilibrium to stop there being wars, and would have been against the unification of Qin Shi Huang, whereas they would have justified their arguments of unification by saying, well, this brings about peace. Mozi would have said, well, what you are doing, in fact, is bringing about war with your good end in mind. Sometimes Mozi comes across as a man of great humour. For example, on page 330. Wu Mazi said to Mozi, "For all the righteousness that you do, men do not help you and ghosts do not bless you. Yet you keep on doing it. You must be demented." Mozi said, "Suppose you have here 2 employees. One of them works when he sees you, but will not work when he does not see you. Other one works whether he sees you or not. Which of the 2 would you value?" Wu Mazi said that he would value him that worked whether he saw him or not. Mozi then said, then you are valuing him who is demented." This really could come straight out of the Analects, this idea of the value of someone trying to be good even when there's good results coming for it for them or not. I think this is probably one of my highlight quotes from the Mozi, one that made me laugh and think again, perhaps in some ways, about what I was doing. Now, I mentioned in my introduction video about how some later chapters make Mozi come across as cold and emotionless. Here's a quote from page 368. There was a man in Nu who sent his son to Mozi to study. The son perished in battle, and the father blamed Mozi for it. Mozi said, "You wanted to have your son trained. Now he had completed his training and died in battle, and you become sore. This is like trying to sell something, and yet becoming sore when it is sold. Isn't this peculiar?" This quote really contradicts in some ways the earlier chapters focus on Gen I that we went through in the first video, that is universal love. Mozi argued that how one feels towards oneself, one should feel that to others. Now here, I suppose Mozi is forgetting that if he'd lost his own son, perhaps he would not respond in this way to the man. A contradiction of Gen I. But I suppose that only goes to show that the later books of the Mozi don't seem to fit in with his main arguments. But what of the man Mozi himself? What was he like? Well, unfortunately, unlike Confucius, which leaves behind us book 10 of the Analects with many descriptions of how Confucius acted, the Mozi doesn't give us much, but there is this one quote from page 14. Watching a dyer of silk at work, Mozi sighed, saying, "What is dyed in blue becomes blue, and what is dyed in yellow becomes yellow. When the silk is put in a different dye, its colour becomes different. Having been dipped in 5 times, it has changed its colour 5 times. Therefore dyeing should be done with great care." This is true not only with silk dyeing. Even a country changes its colour in response to its influences. You see, here's a man he's observing a silk dye, he's observing something commonplace that happens all the time. We all know this kind of person, and he's just seeing something ordinary and connect it to something with a lot of weight and depth. Perhaps this kind of person might be quite tiring to be around, and yet, is what he's saying not true? What he's saying might be true. See, this is typical Mozi. I found it came across through the Mozi. Someone who's always thinking about applying statecraft. This is something that he does a lot more than the other philosophers I've read. A very, very atypical philosopher. Someone with great ideals, Gen I, but also great practice of stagecraft and defending smaller states.